Hi, I'm your iFit guide, Mick Davie. I hope you're feeling good because we're about to take an incredible walk across eons of history here in central Turkey. So grab some water. There are a few hills on this walk. We're going to get your heart rate up and pump blood to the brain because there's a lot to take in here. Right now, we're in the fabled region of Cappadocia. It's a landscape covered with fields of these bizarre ant-like towers, rock-hewn churches, and underground cities. And this region has captivated travelers for centuries, and our walk today will take us through a forest of fairy chimneys and into a vast natural amphitheatre where we're going to meet a friend of mine who's going to guide us through a labyrinth of caves decorated by Christian monks over 1,000 years ago. And if that's piqued your curiosity, wait until you see it all from the sky. These conical formations are the result of volcanic eruptions. Wind, rain, and other forces of nature have eaten away at the volcanic rock, creating what's called tufa, which is a soft and malleable stone. And the malleability of that stone seems in part what attracted humans here 3,500 years ago. Those settlers began to scratch away at the sides of these chimneys, and using very simple tools, they created shallow shelters. And over time, they built a network of caves inside these fairy chimneys. And those first early settlers took advantage of the cool temperatures in the cave to live a much more comfortable life than they had on these harsh open plains. Xenophon, who was a student of the Greek philosopher Socrates, reported seeing corn, rice, vegetables, barley, and beer actually stored in large pots up in these caves. And the tufa was so easy to carve that families simply carved out new rooms for each child that was born. This stone actually cuts like soap, but it hardens as soon as it's exposed to air. And now, after centuries of exposure to wind and water, these chiseled surfaces seem to have gone back to organic shapes. You have this beautiful view out here of this valley, and you can see that it's just dotted with fairy chimneys, and those fairy chimneys are full of little cave dwellings. Cappadocia lies at the crossroads of ancient warring kingdoms and empires. It's as if these strange monoliths, which actually cover hundreds of miles around here, were sentries. And there's actually some evidence that that's exactly what they were used for at different times. However, they've also been used as hiding places for people, their animals and goods for thousands of years as Persian, Greek, Imperial Roman, Byzantine Roman, and Turkish marauders have swept across this landscape. For early Christians, these chimneys became a sanctuary in 300 AD as they fled persecution from the Romans and then later from raiding Arab armies. They dug deep into these rocks, carving out underground cities that went 8 stories below ground. And we're going to explore one of those cities in another episode, so be sure to check that out. The volcanic soil makes this one of the most fertile regions in Turkey. And in spring, the outskirts of Cappadocia are blanketed with huge fields of grapevines and sunflowers. At harvest, the roads are lined with cars and ever-present tractors that pull whole families in carts that were once drawn by horses. Whoops, I'm going to slip down this slope. Okay, here we go. And during the springtime, you see women in headscarves and brightly coloured, very wide trousers bent in the green fields, picking grapes. It's a really lovely sight. And in winter, it's absolutely beautiful around here. The first time I came to Cappadocia, all of these fairy chimneys were powdered with snow, and I spent my days drinking tea and reading by a log fire. It was absolutely blissful. So as recently as 40 years ago, most of these cave dwellings were empty. They'd been abandoned for more modern concrete homes. But in the last few decades, affluent Turks and some foreigners have started turning these fairy chimneys into hotels and homes. So then in 2002, a Turkish soap opera called Asmali Konak, which was set in Cappadocia, put this region on the map and made it famous. And now the area is teeming with cave hotels and camel rides. And this morning I was having breakfast and I saw a waiter walk past with 2 glasses of red wine, and I thought, who's drinking at 7 o'clock in the morning? I followed him outside and I saw this couple posing with the red wine, taking selfies. And you know, I have to admit that that's what a lot of this region has become. People come here to take a quick photo and then spend eternity on social media. Culturally, central Turkey is actually deeply conservative. In most places, if you ask for a drink, you're unlikely to get anything stronger than black tea. But Cappadocia actually boasts a really enthusiastic wine industry, and they have some really good reds here actually. So we're starting to incline here. You're going to feel your machine start to kick up, but as it does, we're going to introduce Jason, my friend Jason. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. So Jason's a historian. He knows this area like the back of his hand. Jason, what is specific and special about this part of Cappadocia?
Yeah, well, we're in the Godame Open Air Museum right now, Mick, which has some of the best churches around, and we got about 15 or so monasteries that are here, and people would come from all around the region to live as a monastic community.
So if my understanding is correct, prior to the development of this sort of amphitheater of churches, most of the Christians who were in this area were practicing their faith as individuals, not living a sort of monastic communal life. Is that broadly right?
Yeah, you know, they were in the cities. There was a city, there was an urban church, and so probably what we're familiar with in terms of most people in the West practicing Christianity. But what they wanted to do here is withdraw from society. They renounced the world, gave up their finances, and they wanted to go live in a harsh environment where they can practice their spirituality and they could, you know, focus on God. So remember, monasticism started in the deserts of Egypt, but then when the Byzantine Empire lost the deserts of Egypt, monasticism really came up to here and flourished in this desert region.
Why was being in a desert environment, a harsh environment, important? How does that bring you closer to God?
Yeah, well, Jesus went out to the desert for 40 days and fasted and prayed. John the Baptist did as well. So there's a rich biblical history in terms of going to the desert, because that's the place of death, right? And so if you can go where there's death and bring the life of God, then that is, you know, bringing God's kingdom, God's new life to earth.
Oh wow, these frescoes are stunning.
Yeah, aren't they?
What do these depict, Jason?
Yeah, well, this picture right here is actually the blessing of the apostles after Jesus rose from the dead. He pronounces a blessing on the apostles. You see the 12 there. And what's most interesting is these two people at the feet of Jesus are actually the donors who paid for and financed the church.
So these are graves for the people who financed the church and appear in the mural.
Yeah, and so they're trying to show their humility. That's why they're bowing down at Jesus' feet. So you come in here. Remember, all this painting is original. This was all done at least 1,000 years ago and hasn't been touched since then.
Wow.
And so you got some cool pictures, you know. The saints are usually on the lower part. So this is Constantine and Helena. you know, the founder of the Byzantine Empire who converted to Christianity.
Interesting.
And then here we have Jesus up front. And so Jesus is sitting on the throne of heaven. And then it's his mother, Mary, called the Mother of God, and John the Baptist, his cousin, on the right.
I mean, it feels like we're in a church. We are in a church,
Yeah.
but we're also in a cave.
Yeah, we're in a cave for sure. And so you notice the pillars are here, the arches. So all the architecture shows that you're in a church. But you're right, we're in a cave.
It doesn't feel Stone Age at all.
No.
Let's keep going. Let's get back
Yeah.
inside. Tell me, if you can, a little bit about the daily life of the people who lived here.
Yeah, so people would come into the monastery, and when they did that, they had to renounce all of their possessions and pledge to be under the head of the abbot. And so the abbot was, you know, the father was the head of the monastery, and he kind of gave counsel to everyone who lived here. And they would pray inside of the church twice a day. And then after the time within the church, they would go and have a meal together. And we'll show you another spot where they had a meal together. And then after they were done with their group activities, they would all go off to their separate cells. And so that was a big part of monasticism, is to be in your cell. It was a little room by yourself where you would pray and you would seek God. And that's really where the real spiritual battle was with, you know, as they tried to overcome the flesh or overcome Satan and become more like Christ.
And being in that cell was about being with yourself, presumably, about quietening your soul.
Yeah.
And listening to your inner voice, or waiting to hear the voice of God.
Yeah, waiting to overcome well, they always talked about the flesh, you know,
Right.
battling against the flesh, battling against Satan and the demons in order to hear Christ and become more like Christ-like.
So Jason, when you came here as a monk or a nun, how much time would you spend here?
Well, it wasn't a 2-week vacation, Mick. When they came into the monastery, it was for life, and they would actually stay here until they died.
This was a lifelong commitment.
Lifelong commitment, and that's actually why I have a lot of older people. When they retired, they would come into a monastery. It's kind of also function as like a retirement home. And the reason why they stayed here for life is because the monks or the monastery pledged to bury you when you died, and then they would pray for you after your death as well.
So it was about a community. This was communal living, about
sure.
being close to God, and there was a sort of comfort, I suppose, in knowing that you had a community that was going to be there with you in your last moments.
Yeah, you're going to be buried, you're going to be remembered after death, and your name would be perpetuated, you know, in the monastery, and would always be remembered by the monks. So yeah, it was a big part of there's a social function to the monasteries as well. Because remember, they're humans, right?
Right. And speaking of human activity, what did people do here on a day-to-day basis? What activities did they do?
Yeah, well, they would often have 2 liturgies inside of the church. You know, it's a very scripted liturgy that they would follow. And then after each one, they would go into the, man, I'm getting tired. This is quite a workout going up, right?
I'm getting a burn in my thighs.
Whew.
Yeah.
They would go from the church into the refectory where they had a meal together. And I'll show you one of those and we can talk about that there. And then after that, they would go into their cells, and each monk would have their own cell. And that was really where the real spiritual activity was, where they would be praying. They would try to be battling against Satan, battling and overcoming the desires of the flesh and becoming more Christ-like.
So spending time alone in their monastic cells, contemplating on the battle between the flesh and the devil,
yes,
was a key part of their kind of spiritual growth.
And what we have here is actually one of the best dining rooms in all of Cappadocia, and you'll see why here.
A dining room?
A dining room where monks will come in and eat. And so you can see this table and the benches are carved from the actual stone. And there's a picture of the Last Supper up there on the wall. You can see, Mick, where Jesus is around the table with his 12 disciples. And so the reason why they have that picture here is because the monks thought they were doing the same thing that Jesus was doing. They were receiving food from God and eating together.
So this was a way to remind them to emulate Christ
and what
in
he
the
was
Last
doing.
Supper.
Yeah.
And this long stone plinth was the table?
Yes, and there's a bench on each side, and then the well between is where they would put their legs. And so when they come in, it's not like a family-style meal they had, we eat, we're having lots of fun. But the monks, what they would do is they would actually sit down. They had to be perfectly quiet, had to look down. They could not talk, they could not laugh, or else the abbot who sat right here would take away their food, and then the monk, as punishment, would have to come into this open area and have to do 20 push-ups.
No.
No joke, right? 1,000 years ago, they still punished had the same sort of mentality.
If you laughed at dinner, you had to do push-ups.
20 push-ups, right? That's what I do with my kids.
So what are we seeing up here, Jason?
Yeah, these are the 4 apostles as they write their gospel book. So this is John writing the Gospel of John and Mark writing his gospel. And that's significant because when the monks lived here, one of the main things they did is they copied out the gospel and they wrote it out. Because remember, this is before Gutenberg, before the printing press. So any copies of any book or any Bible was written by hand by the monks. And so it's interesting, about 80% of all literature in the medieval period was written and copied in the monasteries. That was one of the chief purposes of it. So they're showing how they're imitating the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're like proto-monks.
Aha, okay. These were the guys to emulate.
Exactly.
So Jason, how did the people who lived here feed themselves? Where did the food come from?
Yeah, it didn't come from the grocery store, right?
No.
So back in medieval time, they had to grow their own food. So you look over there across the valley, Mick, and you see on top there's an orchard. And so to this day, apple trees.
Farmland up there.
All farmland up there. And in the valley, there's a little creek running through the bottom of the valley. They could farm the land here.
Right.
But one of the challenges is that when you look around, this rock here, it's not very good soil. It's not very fertile.
Right.
Because it's all volcanic ash that has settled here over time. And so they had to fertilize the soil. And so the way they did that is they would create these rooms for pigeons to come into, and we can actually see some right across the valley over there. Pigeons would come into there and they would roost there and obviously poop, and then the farmers once a year would gather all of the pigeon poop and use that. It's very rich in nitrogen to fertilize the soil.
So the monks and nuns would attract pigeons into this area, collect the poop, and use that to fertilize their farms.
Yeah, they were good farmers, right?
They were good farmers. And was the farming good here? Was there enough to eat? Did they go hungry? I mean, how difficult a life was it from a nutritional perspective? I suppose? They
ate. They obviously stayed alive. A lot of monasteries actually had their own farms and had their own vineyards. So growing grapes for the wine at each meal was also a really important part of it. But their income was often supplemented by rich people who would give donations to the monasteries, right? They would earn some spiritual points that way. The monks would pray for them after their death. But then they also got a tax break for it because any money that went to a monastery wasn't taxed. And
so the rich got tax breaks even back then for supporting a religious community?
Yeah, and it drove the Byzantine emperors nuts because they were losing out on tax revenue. So,
okay.
Same thing then.
And I'm curious, how did these people stay fit?
Well, you see, we've been walking up and down the hills, right?
Walking around for hours. But
yeah.
I guess life was tough, right? I mean, they were monks and nuns, but they were farmers.
So.
They were full-time farmers.
Yeah, they were full-time farmers, had to grow their own food. We've talked about they would be praying as well. They would be copying their manuscripts. That was a very important spiritual activity for them as well. And remember their diet, they're not eating fast food. They're eating all this fresh food that they're making themselves for themselves.
Wood, carrying water.
Yeah. Have to be heating it inside. They're making candles, to light the inside of the churches and the monasteries as well.
Were there families who lived here? Were there children running around?
Sometimes orphans would become a part of the monastery, and they would grow up inside of a monastery. But often when a married couple wanted to enter into a monastery, they would actually get divorced first. He would go into a men's monastery, and she would go into a woman's monastery.
Really?
And they would separate. They would maintain friends, but not sexual relationships, because they renounced that as they came into the monastery.
All right, Jason, this has been amazing. I have learned so much from you. Thank you for spending your day with me.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to head up this way.
All right, bon voyage.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
See you, man.
Congratulations, you've completed the walk, and I hope you had a good time. I really enjoyed walking with you today. And to reward you, a little treat for all your hard work, we're now going to take a look at Cappadocia from the sky. Come and join me in this hot air balloon. Can I jump on board? Please. Thank you. What a way to end the day. Such a beautiful, smooth takeoff. It's such a magical feeling taking off over this landscape and having this whole beautiful flotilla of balloons. It kind of feels like we're in a children's fairy tale, you know, floating over this incredible landscape, surrounded by these beautiful, colorful balloons. It's dreamlike. It's magical. Okay, we're starting to get some height underneath us now. And as the balloon goes higher, this whole landscape is just peeling open. There's something sort of poetic about flying over one of the oldest landscapes in the world. One of the oldest human settlements in Turkey, in a balloon, which was one of the oldest forms of human air transportation. It has been such a pleasure to be part of this series with you. You've seen the very best that Turkey has to offer. But stay tuned to iFit. We're going to be exploring lots of different parts of the world, and I look forward to seeing you out there for more great walks. I'm Mick Davie, your iFit guide.